All right, good morning, Canyons. How are we doing? Great. Hey, let's jump into our talk for this morning. We have started a series at the beginning of the month that we are wrapping up today called Change. And it all starts with this idea that we have these prayers that we make. One of which being, God, change me. And if you've ever really struggled with just habits that you just don't seem you can break, that you have turmoil in your life, and you're like, I think I am the source of this. And you're like, when will things be different? Well, it starts with this prayer of God, change me. And then we move to a second prayer. God, change me to change others. That suddenly as God does something in your heart and in your life, you start realizing that God has supernaturally and providentially put people on the front row of your life, that you have a unique opportunity to make an incredible difference for them. And then the third prayer that we talked about last week is God, change me to change the world. And that God has actually commissioned us, and God has given us as a church the mission to go into all the world and make disciples. And we talked about how we can play a part even if we are not packing our bags and getting up and going, how God wants to use you. He wants to use us to change the world. And then today we're starting, we have the fourth prayer of God, change me to change generations. Now, I just finished this past month a biography on our second president, John Adams, which I know none of you are surprised by. Like, what was the over-under that I would read at least 5 or 6 Dave McCullough books? Like, I don't know, like negative 1,200? Like, we just say that this is like right up my wheelhouse, okay? Like, this is something that I know you're all thinking, that's a dude who loves to read history. But as I read about John Adams, it was a really fascinating character because, he is so integral to many parts of our history. But when he left office in 1800, there was kind of this idea that he was somewhat of a failure. I mean, he was beat in that election of 1800 by his vice president, Thomas Jefferson. And when he left office and he left Washington, D.C., he was somewhat unpopular, even amongst people that used to be his allies. And then when you really take another step back, he is flanked on either side by an incredibly popular first president in George Washington and an incredibly popular president, the third one, Thomas Jefferson. Like you go to Mount Rushmore right now, you see 4 faces. You have the president that was before him and you see the president who was after him. And so there's part of his own psyche that was just wrestling with the fact that, man, was I a failure as a president? Was I a failure in public office, that I had given my life to so many different parts of this union, and how has it repaid me? And at the end of the day, he leaves office, and there was a sense that he was overshadowed, limited, and rejected. Now, history, on the other hand, has been a lot kinder. That when you actually look at his career in its totality, he served in the Continental Congress, that he was our first ambassador to France during the Revolutionary War. When the war was over, they sent him to Paris to negotiate the treaty that actually ended the war. Like, he was incredibly important. He wrote 2 incredible documents. The Constitution for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which, if you're wondering what is a Commonwealth and what's a state, I still can't figure it out, but John Adams said, we are going to make Massachusetts a Commonwealth. And he also wrote a pamphlet called Thoughts on Government, both of which were instrumental when writing the US Constitution. But his legacy doesn't even stop there. That he has a son by the name of John Quincy Adams, that when he goes to France to be the ambassador for the United States, he's there every step of the way, his son, John Quincy Adams. And so by the time he finishes law school and starts his own career, and the government's saying, who is somebody with some, negotiating prowess, like somebody that could actually be a diplomat across the seas, they send John Quincy Adams as a young man, and he goes to be an ambassador to the Netherlands. Then when he comes back, he's elected as a US senator and eventually Secretary of State, and then elected as our 6th president. And even after only serving 1 term, John Quincy Adams ends up going back into Congress as a US representative and serves for 17 years. And his legacy is one, he was an ardent opponent to slavery, and he had a reputation as being old man eloquence around. But so much of this was missed in the moment for John Adams. And it's a tragedy that by the time he died, many of his contemporaries and even a little part of himself just kind of wondered, man, did I really accomplish much? But here's kind of the big thought as we have this prayer today of God, change me to change generations. Success is what you accomplish, but legacy is what you pass on. If you can imagine, like just in my role, I've been to a lot of 50th wedding anniversaries over the years. And you know what's the most impressive thing about going to 50th wedding anniversaries? Is that, oftentimes the couple, like they're celebrating the trips that they took or just the business success that somebody has had within the marriage. But what's always impressive to me is not so much like where did they go or what did they accomplish, it's the family. Because when you have a 50th wedding anniversary and you have a family that likes each other and they love each other and they get along well and that they actually have been somewhat successful in their own rights, it's like that right there. That is something that I dream of for myself. Like, how can I leave a legacy that will not just go one generation, but 2, 3, 4, 5 generations down? And so that's what this fourth prayer is all about. God, change me to change generations. Not just how can I live a good life now, but how can I live a good life that cascades from one generation to the next. All right, quick experiment. Let's just see how we're doing in here. If you know the names of your great-great-grandparents, not one of them, not like 2 of them, but you know the names of all 16 of your great-great-grandparents, raise your hand. All right, this is exactly what I expect. Now these are, okay, Nicolai, wow, that's pretty impressive. So one of us can do this. This is my point though. Like these are your grandparents' grandparents. Like, can we all agree that these were pretty significant people for who you are, right? Like you are at least, I don't know, like 7.5% of like each one of those 16 all the way down to you. But the point I'm trying to make is this. Sometimes we get in our head, well, what happens later than me, like I don't remember my great-great-grandparents' names, so like I don't know how significant it is, but you live in the wake of the decisions that those 16 individuals made, sometimes hundreds of years ago, as it's been passed down to you, that you live out the legacy, whether they intended it or not, of the decisions that they made. And the same thing is true for you and those who will come after you as well. That the decisions you right now, they're going to have a reverberation. That it's going to move from this generation to the next, and even if you don't have kids, your decisions, who you are as a person, it moves through the generations all the way down. That you are an echo of those who came before, and you will leave an echo for those who come after. But the thing is, legacies are not crafted by accident. So today I want to tell you a cautionary tale. See, if you look back at the Old Testament, you see a lot of these dual histories of 2 different nations, the nation of Israel and the nation of Judah. Now, at one point, they'd all been one nation, but there was some drama, and it split into 2 different. And 10 tribes out of the 12 went to the north to form the nation of Israel, and then 2 nations went to the south to form the nation of Judah. And as you read through this, here's what you find is that the kings of Israel and the people of Israel, the majority at least, maybe there were some who didn't, but the majority and all of the kings of Israel, they never made the right decisions. They always screwed up big time. Now, when you go to the nation of Judah, it was like a sometimes. Sometimes they were good, sometimes they were bad, sometimes they were awful. And there were 2 kings of Judah in particular who were nothing like each other. One was by the name of Hezekiah. He was one of the good ones. This is the description of him in 2 Kings 18:5. It says that there was no one like him among all the kings of Judah, either before or after his time. Now, obviously, this could go either way, but this was a compliment to him, that nobody had ever come before him like this, and nobody after him would come like this. And on the other hand, there was another king named Manasseh, and this is God's epitaph on his life. King Manasseh of Judah has done many detestable things. He's even more wicked than the Amorites who lived in this land before Israel. He has caused the people of Judah to sin with his idols. And here's the tragic part. Manasseh was Hezekiah's son. How does such a massive swing take place? What happened in Hezekiah's life to where what he stood for did not get passed down to the next generation. Now, I think that there's a reason for it, and I'll reveal it in a little bit, but let's just take a little bit more of just how incredible Hezekiah was as a king. I'm telling you, like Hezekiah, he was the man. When you read his account in 2 Kings 18 through 20, there are a lot of wins. Like just listen, this is verse 3 of chapter 18. It says, he did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight, just as his ancestor David had done. Like that's a good thing. He removed the pagan shrines, he smashed the sacred pillars, and he cut down the Asherah poles. Now, why is that a big deal? Because the idol worship in the land almost always led to heartbreak. That whenever people started walking away from God and pursuing these other idols and religions, it always resulted in debauchery. It always resulted in heartache. It always ended in death and murder. So where the previous generation was like all in on these things. Some of those kings, they supported it. Some just tolerated it. He said, I'm done with it. And he tears them all down. In fact, that's not the only thing he does. It keeps going. It says, he broke up the bronze serpent that Moses has made because the people of Israel had been offering sacrifices to it. The bronze serpent was called Nehushtan. Now, here's the thing about this. This would have been a very risky proposition. In Israelite history, there was nobody whose shadow was cast longer than Moses. He wrote the first 5 books of the Old Testament, that he was considered like the preeminent prophet, that he spoke on behalf of God. He brought the 10 Commandments down off of Mount Sinai. He led the people out of bondage of slavery in Egypt, all the way to the promised land. And in one of the stories that shows up, these serpents come in and they start biting the people. And as Moses calls out on behalf of the people, like, how do we get this fixed? God says, I want you to fashion a bronze serpent. And whenever you lift up that bronze serpent, whenever anybody looks at it, they will be healed. And like, just an aside, the cool part about this, it was a complete foreshadowing of Jesus coming. In fact, as Jesus is talking to Nicodemus in John chapter 3, he says basically like, I am the bronze serpent lifted up, that anyone who looks upon it will be healed. Like it's kind of a cool like metaphor that we've got here. But over time, it had moved from being the sign of God's healing and God's protection to becoming an idol worshiped by the people. That it no longer had its identity rooted in God, it had its identity rooted in a special mysticism that would give you exactly what you want and need. But it also is in this weird gray area of that it still was fashioned by Moses. And so when he says, I want you to tear it down, we need to destroy it. You can imagine he was going to take heat from both sides, but he was just so convinced that this is what was needed for the nation. If we want to return back to God, we need to get rid of anything that would possibly lead us away. And so what does he do? He says, destroy it. Now, later when the Assyrians, like this big bully of a nation, comes and wipes out the Israelites, he then starts pounding on the door of Judah. And he says, Hezekiah, we will not pay tribute. He's signaling to the entire world, our hope is not in our maneuvering and in our strategy. It is 100% in our God who will protect us. Now, in all fairness to the narrative and to the story, after he refuses tribute, they come knocking again, and he gets kind of scared. And it says this, that he used all the silver stored in the temple of the Lord and the palace treasury. Hezekiah even stripped the gold from the doors of the Lord's temple and from the doorposts he had overlaid with gold, and he gave it all to the Assyrian king. So when they're threatening, he kind of freaks out, and he pays them, but even after he pays them, it's like, we're coming back. And this is what's incredible that he does. It says in verse 1 of chapter 19, when King Hezekiah heard their report, he tore his clothes, he put on burlap, and he went into the temple of the Lord. So what's he do? He bears his heart out to God, and he says, I need you to bail me out. I mean, even in one of his worst moments, what does he do? He says, I'm turning back to God. And so God hears this prayer, and he follows through. And I'm sure that Hezekiah was having all of the different thoughts and ruminations and just I know what's gonna happen. I'm gonna have to go to war, and maybe, just maybe, God will come alongside me and we won't lose as many as we thought, or maybe we're only gonna have just a partial hit, but that's not what God does. Listen to this description. It says, that night, the angel of the Lord went out to the Assyrian camp and he killed 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. And when the surviving Assyrians woke up the next morning, they found corpses everywhere. Then King Sennacherib of Assyria broke camp and returned to his own land, and he went home to the capital of Nineveh and he stayed there. And then verse 37, one day while he was worshiping in the temple of the god Nisroch, his sons, Adrammelech and Sharezer, I can't pronounce these words, but killed him with their swords, and then escaped to the land of Ararat. And another son, Areshadon, became the next king of Assyria. I mean, think about just the miracle that just happened in Hezekiah's life. What is he scared of? Well, the invading nation's gonna come. They're not just gonna take all of our wealth like they already have, but they're gonna take our people captive. And without ever having to lift a sword, God takes out the entire army that's threatening them. Without having to lift a single sword, God takes out the king. He cuts off the head of the snake, and suddenly his people are free. Where did it start? An unflinching faith. And here's what we're learning along the way. We're learning you can be a success in your generation and be a failure to the next one. We're also learning our greatest strengths can't make up for the areas that we choose to neglect. Like, God is obviously working in Hezekiah's life. He's successful. He has a relationship that is evident. But yet there's some disconnect between Hezekiah and Manasseh. And I went to college at a Christian university to train to be a pastor. And I grew up a pastor's kid. I have a friend who always jokes like, hey, I grew up with a drug problem. I was drugged to church on Wednesday nights, Sunday nights, Monday, So I get to Christian university and I am in class with a lot of other pastors' kids, just kind of one of those things where a lot of their parents just said, you need to go to the Christian school. And here's the thing that just was so baffling to me was so many of these kids, they were not there by choice. And what had happened is a lot of their parents led very large and successful ministries that they had hundreds, if not thousands of people who looked to them as leaders. And on the stage, they were platformed as being totally in love with God. And I actually believe that they were. But a lot of their kids wanted nothing to do with church and definitely wanted nothing to do with God. And I always kind of were like, well, what is the disconnect here? Because I'd grown up in this environment and I feel like it strengthened my faith. A lot of them had grown up in this environment and it didn't really seem like things are connected. And with some, not all, but with some, there was this consistent theme that a lot of their parents had this attitude of, if I take care of the church, I just trust that God will take care of my family. And so they would kind of check out on the parenting side of things and they would pour everything into a ministry or into a public relationship with God. And meanwhile, their kids never really understood why they felt that way. And I recognize, as I even share this isn't necessarily an illustration that connects with a lot of you, because most of you, I'm assuming, did not grow up as a pastor's kid like I did. But I've noticed that the same mentality kind of slips into our everyday life, even for those who are not paid to be a Christian like I am. We get this attitude, right? Where sometimes we think faith is it's a personal thing. I don't want to try and impose it on anybody. I'm not gonna make my kids have to do all this. And we take that attitude, and there's some benefits to that, but sometimes we take that attitude to an extreme, and suddenly something that's so personal and meaningful to you is completely misunderstood by your children because you never explained. Here is why God means so much to me. Here is what he has done in my life. Here is the track record of faithfulness that God has had in my life. And there ends up becoming this disconnect along the way. It's how does Manasseh, the king who comes after him, just not see the world the same way? Well, we're still not really to what I think is the cause yet. But in Hezekiah's story, he gets incredibly sick one day. Like so sick, he's about to die. And he calls upon God. And he says, God, I need you to heal me. And a prophet shows up and says, like, God is willing to heal you. What do you need for proof? And he says, like, I'm asking that the sundial would move backwards like 15 hours. And God said, sure, done. And it actually goes backwards 15 hours. And God gives him 15 more years of health. And what happens is word starts getting out that Hezekiah is sick. And so different nations start sending envoys to go check on the king. And one of those envoys comes from this nation state that is pretty far away, but is starting to pick up some steam, called the Babylonians. And the Babylonians, they come and they visit Hezekiah. And when they get there, he is no longer sick. He is incredibly healthy. And when they ask, what happened? Hezekiah doesn't share how God has healed him. He gives them a tour. And he walks them into the treasury, and he walks them into the temple, and he starts showing off all the incredible things that he's been blessed with. But there's an implicit message. Look how great I am, that I have all of this. And Hezekiah chose to conceal the miracle. And a private miracle rarely creates a public legacy. So it happens, the Babylonians leave, and the prophet comes back and is like, Hezekiah, do you know what you've done? You know that someday the Babylonians are coming back, and they're going to take everything you just showed them. They're going to steal everything that you've accumulated. What was Hezekiah's reaction to this? I think that this is the linchpin in understanding how somebody as good as Hezekiah could have a son like Manasseh. And just to recap, just so you are all on the same page with me on what I mean by this, here's the contrast between the two. Hezekiah was a man after God's heart, and what we learn about Manasseh is that he did what was evil in the Lord's sight. That was a direct quote from 2 Kings 21:2. Whereas Hezekiah tears down the shrines, 2 Kings 21:3, Manasseh rebuilt the pagan shrines his father Hezekiah destroyed. So everything he took, builds back. This is more about Manasseh and his terrible track record. He even went as far as to construct pagan shrines in the temple of the Lord. So not just like on the outskirts of town, he brought it right into the center. And then this should cause us all pause. Manasseh also sacrificed his own son in the fire. And this is the true epitaph on Manasseh's life. Manasseh also murdered many innocent people until Jerusalem was filled from one end to the other with innocent blood. One has a reputation of goodness. The other one has a reputation of evil, pagan worship, and human sacrifice. So, what is it I think is indicative of why faith was not passed from one generation to the next? Listen to this. When the prophet comes and says, the Babylonians are coming after everything, this was Hezekiah's response. Then Hezekiah said to Isaiah, this message you have given me from the Lord is good. And the reason why it was good is because of this. For the king was thinking, at least there will be peace and security during my lifetime. Because the prophecy was, they're coming, but they're not coming right now. And his attitude was, well, as long as I get to live out my life in peace and security and opulence with everything that I want, then this is a good message. Hezekiah was the victim of what I call a one-generation mindset. Proverbs 13:22 says, a good people, or in other translations, a wise man, leaves an inheritance to their grandchildren. There's this pattern that shows up quite a bit in the scripture. That God wants to be faithful to you, but he wants to be faithful to you so that you can teach those things to your children and your grandchildren and the people who come later. That they're doing everything in their power to make it easy for the next generation to find and follow Jesus. And the lesson we get from this is while our faithfulness isn't a guarantee for the next generation, our apathy is. If you do not care what happens after you leave, that will be a legacy that lives on. Now, I just want to diffuse some of the tension in the room because I've been around long enough to where it's easy to put like nice, thick, black lines around certain things. Like, well, if you do these right things, then of course, your kids will turn out great. And like Hezekiah could somehow control just Manasseh's heart entirely. I think there's enough there to see that his apathy was making a difference. But what I'm trying to say is this: you can do all the right things and your kids might still biff it. Just to be fair, or just be clear. And the reason why is because every single one of us has ingrained within us a desire to do the wrong thing. And it's one of the reasons why it's so important that we try and create an environment where it's easy for them to say yes to Jesus, but the truth is, it doesn't always happen. And in fact, just case in point, if you go back to the very, very beginning, you have God creating our first set of parents, and he puts them in the perfect environment. They have no wants, they have no needs, they don't even have a desire to do wrong. But then what happens is within that perfect environment where they have the perfect parents, God himself, they still chose to sin. Jesus, he's mentoring and leading a group of 12 that was his like innermost circle. One of them has the reputation of being the son of perdition. Okay, what I'm trying to say is this, that you might have done everything in your power to lead your children to do the right thing, and they still might not have gone the right direction. And I just want you to know, you can let yourself off the hook. But if your legacy is, I did not care, I put no thought into it, or if you're at a position right now where like, well, I just want to maximize what I get right now. Because this is the difference between a 1, 2, and 3 generation mindset. A 1 generation mindset says, you know what, if I leave nothing behind, that's okay. A 2 generation mindset says, if I leave something behind but they screwed up, that's okay. But a 3 generation mindset says, I want to instill a character and a culture that lives well beyond me, so that the ripples through time and generations is one that I have at least pointed it in the right direction. See, leaving a legacy on purpose means this: you don't choose if you leave a legacy, only what kind of legacy you leave. And Hezekiah does not look beyond his own lifetime. He says, oh, this is good, for at least I will have peace and security in my lifetime. And it comes down to this: intentionality. Is that when it comes to leading a family, if you have the prayer of God, change me to change generations, it comes in the form of intentionality. Of what are the types of things I'm going to do? What are the things I'm going to care about? Like, what do you love more? Do you love your job more, or do you love your kids more? And the way that this plays out is, yeah, I never see my kids ever, but I got a raise. The way it plays itself out is, man, am I going to talk about my faith around them, or am I just gonna, that's just a me thing? Like, there's certain ways that we have to be intentional about this. And we have to try and pour into the next generation. In fact, I feel so strongly about this that one of our core values as a church is next gen commitment. And we say it this way: we refuse to let the story end with us. Therefore, we will give up any comfort, we will change any method, and sacrifice any preference for the sake of the next generation. And that's true on the church level, but it's true in your family as well. Are you willing to sacrifice just a little bit if it makes the next generation's path that much easier to following a God that you say is important to you. But the same is also true within our church. That I want to be the type of place where we say we have done everything in our power to make sure that this church lives well beyond us. I mean, how cool will it be when this church hits its 200th anniversary in the year 2069? And that we can look back and say, you know, I might not even be there for it, but the decisions that we made, the sacrifices that we took, the types of things we invested in are living well beyond us. And it comes down to intentionality. This is one of the reasons why in 2 Timothy 2:2, it says, you have heard me teach things and have been confirmed by many reliable witnesses. Now teach these truths to others, trustworthy people who will be able to pass them on to others. And what we see is a 4-generation pass along here in 2 Timothy 2. As you have Paul who says, I'm going to teach it to Timothy, and Timothy, you're going to teach it to somebody else, and that person's going to teach it to someone else. That is a multi-generational mindset of not just let me invest in you for your sake, but let me invest in you so that you can pass it along for generations to come. That toxicity that just seems like a cycle in your family that almost feels like an heirloom just being passed along, you're changed. You can stop that. That can be part of the reverberation. That can be part of the legacy that you leave, is that you were the one who said, no longer. We're not doing that. You can have a legacy of generosity to where when people have needs that you love and care about, they know your family is one that will stand up. You can have the type of legacy of faith that we believe God no matter what. And you can't make excuses for those who came before you. You say, starting right now. I'm inviting you as a family, as a person, make it hard for those who come after you to not see the life that you lived and why it was important to you. But I'm also inviting you as a church. Let's rally around the next generation. When we look at our kids and our youth, our college, our young adults, that we don't sideline them, that we say, no, we want you in here. We want to include you. We want you to be a part of this. Why? Because you're not just the church of tomorrow, you're the church of today. But we know that what we do now will get repeated later. And maybe for the next 50, 60, 100, 150 years, there can be a gospel witness and testimony coming from 5055 Governor Drive throughout all of San Diego because of our mindset and our sacrifice and our commitment right now. You have no idea what seeds that are planted now are going to blossom into later. There was a missionary that lived a couple hundred years ago by the name of Adoniram Judson, and he moves to the country of Burma in the 1800s, and he goes through incredible hardship. His wife dies early in life. He marries again, and they end up dying at sea. He pastors a church, and after 6 years, he'd only baptized one person. After 10 years, it was just a handful of people. And by the time he died, 37 years later, his church was fragile, and it didn't look like it was even going to survive. But what he didn't see, that he wouldn't be informed of until he's walking on the streets of gold, and God can inform of just the legacy that he actually left, is that while he was in Burma, he translates the Bible into Burmese. He writes a dictionary that's still actually referred to today. And today, the Myanmar Baptist Convention has over 1.1 million members, and there are 5,000 churches in it. And all of it gets traced right back to Adoniram Judson, who, when he was walking this earth, probably didn't feel like what he was doing was going to amount to much at all. You don't know how God is going to use what you've done to change others. But it starts with intentionality. If you don't care about who comes after you, That will leave a legacy. But if you do, it has the potential to reverberate for generations to come. You don't choose if you leave a legacy, only what kind of legacy you leave. When Jesus died on the cross and before he's put in the grave, it kind of looked like his whole movement was over. That here you have somebody that was largely homeless for most of his career. He's going from place to place, and the crowds that were there just a couple years earlier had just dwindled down to a handful of others. And yeah, they did say, Hosanna, Hosanna, when he walks into Jerusalem, but they also said, crucify him, just a few days later. But within a generation, churches were popping up all over the known world. Within 400 years, it was a force to be reckoned with, bringing the Roman Empire to its knees. And then 1,500 years later, it had largely gone almost entirely around the world. You don't know what your intentionality to do is going to lead to. The fact that you don't remember your great-great-grandparents' names, it shouldn't demotivate us. It should actually give us a sense of, well, I might not leave my name, but I'm going to leave a mark. And it's going to make a difference. But it starts with this prayer. God, change me to change generations. And the change we're referring to is this. God, I've got nothing. Nothing good lives within me. That I am somebody who is in desperate need of help. That I've walked in the wrong direction. I have perpetuated toxic cycles. I have said things that I regret. I have done things that I shouldn't have done. But yet you love me. And it's evidenced by the fact that you laid your life down for me. And as God saves you from the consequences of your sin, as he forgives you for everything that you've done, as he takes full control of your life, he starts to do a work inside of you and suddenly gives you the ability to do the things that you never would have been able to do in your own power and to become not just a different kind of person, but a new creation. And so whatever that little voice in the back here that's saying, you've already screwed up, if there's still breath in your lungs, there is still potential in your life. And that God wants to change you for your sake. He wants to change you for others' sake. He wants to change you for the world's sake. And he wants to change you for generations. Let me pray for us. With our heads bowed and our eyes closed, if you're here right now and you're saying, Matt, I want to leave a legacy that goes beyond my lifetime, just throw your hand up real fast and put it right back down. I just want to pray for you. Awesome. I love it. God, I'm praying right now for those who would say right now, I want my life to matter. I want my life to make a difference. I want to leave a mark in this generation, the next generation, and generations to come, that even if they don't know my name, they'll live in a world that I helped create. God, I'm praying that you would be so real to us, that you would shape us from the inside out. That God, that you would birth inside of us a hunger and a desire for you. That we would not be content with following in our own old patterns, but God, we would bring them to you and we would ask for your forgiveness, that you would grant it, and that we would live a life now controlled by the Spirit, not harnessed by our own flesh. God, I pray for those in this room who need to say yes to you for the very first time, that as I walk through just the transformation that is possible, and they realize I've never done that God, you would just put this prayer in their heart and on their lips of, God, I need you. I know that you love me, and I'm asking you to forgive me of my sins, take full control of my life, and lead me into a better tomorrow. So God, we know that you're good. We know that you care. And so Lord, I pray this all in your son, Jesus' name. Amen.